Hi, I'm June Cleese from Waging Dialogue. At a time in history when Americans are being sold an avalanche of false, fear-based political propaganda, the impact on our personal lives, sadly, is noticeable. Study after study shows that Americans actually have a lot more in common than appears on social media, is seen propagated by the national political parties, and can be found on cable TV news. Yet, in our daily lives, most of us get along quite well. We care about each other and prefer to focus on solving the issues impacting our families and communities in our daily lives without outdated political party spin, toxicity, or bullying getting in the way. The following conversation was recorded as an introduction to a workshop hosted by the Listen First Project and Waging Dialogue called It Takes Two: Forging Politically Resilient Relationships. In it, you'll hear about how you're not alone in feeling overwhelmed by the damage political toxicity has done. And if you join the workshop experience, you'll find space to share your concerns and experiences, gain tips on how to manage political toxicity and bullying, and learn how to forge more politically resilient relationships with the ones you care about the most. So, thank you for watching and thank you for joining us. We hope to see you at one of our workshops soon. Welcome to It Takes Two: Building Politically Resilient Relationships, brought to you by Waging Dialogue Productions in collaboration with the Listen First Project. I'm Dr. June Cleese, your host, and today I'm joined by my colleagues and friends, Ms. Carissa Raskin, Chief Executive Officer of the Listen First Project, and Dr. Alice Mayer, a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and founder of Waging Dialogue. In this overview conversation, we'll discuss navigating politically diverse relationships through life's closest bonds and building politically resilient relationships with family, friends, and domestic partners. So let's get started. Alice, Carissa, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, June.
So it seems to me that when we're considering politics in interpersonal relationships, it's important to first assess the overall health and general dynamics of the relationship, and then flesh out how political differences or toxicity may come into play. So I guess my first question is, how might someone go about doing an initial kind of assessment of a relationship's health and then determining the impact that political differences might have?
Well, I see a lot of people who talk about political differences. It's funny, the first 3/4 of my practice, nobody talked about politics. Now everybody does. And sometimes people who have problematic relationships will weaponize politics as just another tool to attack their partner with. It doesn't help to start with political differences with those people. It helps to start with what's wrong with the foundations of the relationship. In other situations, couples that have a pretty okay, stable relationship have really struggled with the fact that one of the partners is allied with the conservative and the other with the liberal, and they really struggle with each other, and that is, it's significant, and it's very hard to talk about because I think that kind of otherness is threatening. And when you're confronted with somebody who's like that different, sees the world that differently, there's a fight or flight thing that kicks in. The amygdala, the hypothalamus, the autonomic nervous system. We go into fight or flight mode, and we start to say, "How dare you think that? I'm out of here. I'm going to divorce you," or just shut up. I don't want to hear about it. We have to start there and say, we need to tolerate the discomfort of the otherness so that we can sit and listen.
Yeah, and I would just add, thinking about the relationship over time. I mean, as Alice just mentioned, for, 75% of her practice, people weren't talking about this, and now they are. And so I think also reflecting on a relationship, and has there been, maybe not particularly around political differences, but has there been a conflict, a struggle, something that's been constantly kind of slowly eating away at it, that feels like if it's not this, it's that. There's always something. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is lost. It just means that there is an element of communication or a lack of understanding that needs to be delved into and dealt with. And if it's not, it doesn't matter whether it's political, it doesn't matter whether it's about parenting, it could be about where we want to go for Thanksgiving. Like, the fundamental root of the relationship has a communication and an understanding problem that needs to be addressed. And so looking at the trajectory of how long that has existed will help you determine, is this really politics or is this something more than that?
Right, right. Because the politics could be masking, or it could be the latest iteration of
Exactly.
the tensions and the conflict. And
Yeah.
that's a process of deep discernment, really, when you think about it, and definitely asks us to kind of, well, moving on sort of to the next question here, think about, what's really at stake. For example, in what ways can political differences impact things that matter within the relationship? For example, like commonly held values, how you function as a couple or as a family in your daily life. If you have children, the impact on raising those children. So what do you think about that? What do you think are some of those impacts that, okay, assuming that the relationship, let's just say otherwise, okay, normal ups and downs, right? But otherwise mostly seems to be functional. But now here's this political thing, right? That seems to be poking away at elements of the stability of the relationship because of the difference. What's at stake when we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there could be a lot at stake. And the only way and I think it's going to be different for everyone, and really assessing the relationship at large, both, looking back and current, reflecting on what are, politics aside, are commonly held values. What are the things that I deeply know about this person to be true, and maybe being influenced, maybe by something that the other is saying, or maybe by just my own perception or what I think I'm hearing, because the media and the influence of those echo chambers does a lot. And so we may not even be really giving the opportunity to the other person to fully express all of their values and all of their points of view. As Alice mentioned, our brains are very quickly getting on defensive mode because we assume what we're going to hear. So I think in order to evaluate what's at stake, we have to calm our system, and we have to be able to deeply reflect on, what are the things that I can observe and know about this person that were why I became connected with them in the past and loved them, and how much of that is still very much present today, and how much of their day to day can I still truly appreciate if I let down that constant assumption or guard that they're on the other side, so I couldn't possibly agree or understand. Alice, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Um, the one thing that I see, people sometimes will talk about it because it's external to them. They'll watch the news and they'll say, "I like Trump," or "How dare you." Other times it's deeply personal.
Mm.
A transgender child, an abortion. I've seen those, and they're so painful when one person wants to, honor the child's desire to be a they, and the other says, "Oh, get over it. Tomboy is a thing." And so it really is something that has to be addressed for very deeply human reasons in the immediate moment, and it's very hard.
Hmm.
And it seems that the more intentional you are in working through these questions, especially on the values and aspirations that you have together as a couple, the better off it's going to be. It sounds to me like sitting down journaling, or if the person's open, to maybe sitting down together and creating a list of these are the things that we value. And also keeping in mind, and I know we can maybe talk about this later, but that the role of self-regulation in all this, Carissa mentioned kind of calm your system a bit, recognizing that, all this toxicity that's out there, it picks at our brains, it fires up our amygdala, it gives us that false sense that the tiger is going to attack. And now if this person in your whether it's a partner or a close family member or whatever, now you go see them and now you're in the back of your mind, that tiger is there. It's sort of because about the differences. So how do we also be very conscious of that as we really try to self-evaluate and be realistic to what is really shared between two people, with or without the politics at first, and then in relationship to okay, so there are some differences. How do we move on from there? And I guess that moves into where I want to go next with this, which is, okay, so say you decide with your partner, or even if it's initially more of a quiet thing that you're working on before maybe you take that next step with your partner or other family member. When we think about these differences, you kind of have to assess like whether or not it's really something you should do, right? Like, is this actually worth it? Is the politics? I think that's why that first idea of going through, well, what are the values and laying that groundwork? To what degree are the political differences actually really impacting your ability to function together? And should it maybe even be something you just marginalize more? Is that a possibility? Or maybe avoid, although I don't necessarily think that's the solution, but maybe it is okay depending on that relationship. So what are meaningful ways that we can look at making relationships stronger, bringing in that idea of political difference?
Yeah, I mean, we always say core to being able to work on any sort of division, being able to have the opportunity to see something different. Fundamentally, there has to be a willingness to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes on both sides. And not everyone is in a position in a given moment to hold that space for curiosity. And so going back to what we were talking about before, like you have to evaluate the relationship. You also have to self-evaluate where you're at. There are going to be times that you do need to step away, whether it's your spouse, whether it's uncle you're only going to see once a year, or that friend that you love them but really there can be situations where you need that space because your brain, you're just not going to be able to hear them. But I think over time in evaluating this as to like, should we try? Should we lean in? Is this something that we actually want to work on? Both parties have to fundamentally agree to be curious, listen, and strive to understand where the other person is coming from. And I think they're also, and this is very, very, very difficult, especially when it comes to bringing up a child, that at a certain point, a decision will need to be made. And so also understanding that common ground will take a long time and may not always be reached. But are there enough other things in the relationship that balance that out? And the things for an individual that are deal breakers, can the other party be a little bit softer? Is there give and take? I think that's also a really critical element. But if you're in a situation where you have strong feelings and you're not able to communicate them because no matter how much you listen, the other person refuses and doesn't give you that space or grace, then it does become a question of, is there room for growth? Is the other person ready? Do I need to give them time? Or is this just not something that's possible for them? And in some cases, that unfortunately may be the way it goes. And it's not what we like to advocate in bridge building. But if people aren't willing, in my brain, it's a difference between depolarization and de-radicalization. You cannot demand or physically require somebody to strip themselves of their point of view. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's
Alice.
true. I, you know, some couples or family members agree to just not talk about it, and others enjoy the fighting about it. It's like the Yankees versus the Mets, and they can do that too, and it can actually build a relationship.
Yep.
I've seen that happen. Other times it really is a strain, and it does take two, because both parties have to agree, as you said, to listen to each other. And if one person wants to do it and the other one, fights back with, "Oh, that's racist," or, "Oh, that's I'm going to dismiss what you hold dear and is meaningful to you with a label and some," it's just not going to work.
Right, right. So, okay, so let's say then that a couple's on board with, okay, we have these political differences. We value our relationship, right? We know its strengths, we know its weaknesses. We value that. We value continue to work on our relationship, and we have political differences of whatever sort they may be. And this could, interestingly enough, two people can be from the same party leaning or the same ideological camp and have some pretty intense differences too. We often think about it like left, right, Republican, Democrat, but somebody could be a libertarian and somebody else could be, Green Party or whatever it is. Not just the boxes that are typically defined for us out there, to get more nuanced, whatever those differences may be. So, okay, they say, yeah, okay, political difference has a space in our relationship, has a place, and we will talk about it. So, in that context, then, are there any I have tools or just techniques that you would think of, maybe just to kind of say, this is something to consider doing? I mean, we mentioned listing values, right, or, in general, but maybe just going through a listing of, these are some of the key issues that you really care about under politics. Here's, do a Venn diagram. Where do we differ? Where do we disagree? Right. So just some of those basic, sit down with each other, find a quiet space. I don't know, put some soothing music on and sit down and talk about where your political differences lie. But do you guys have any other thoughts or tips that you can come up with that you think, well, if you're going to go down this route, maybe here's some things to think about?
Hmm.
Yeah, I could use a couples therapy model, which is basically you let one person speak and talk about how you came to believe what you believe. Make it part of your story. And this is this trajectory of my life. This is why this matters to me. And the other person listens, reflects back. I hear you saying that. And when a person feels validated, they breathe. They don't have to do the fight or flight. They're then willing to listen to you, even if you're different. And then the other person has their turn. And you do the same thing, reflect back and forth, and you can slowly talk about the issue without being triggered to dismiss and ridicule the other person.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like that, and the reflection and making sure, even for the person to feel validated, but also just the self-verification that I actually heard what the other is saying, and I didn't, my own biases or what I hear out in, my environment outside of our relationship didn't skew what you were saying. I think that's amazing advice. And in addition to that, I would say, if there are things that someone gets wrong or even just that don't make sense, it can be a natural reaction, especially when we're argumentative, to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I write that off as, you're full of it. But really leaning in again to those questions of curiosity, I heard you say this. I don't think I quite understand. Can you tell me more? Or I heard you explain how you got to that point, but maybe there's more that you can describe for me that'll help me better understand. Like that also shows a deep desire to hear the other person and their truth, which is further validating that you're not trying to pick apart or dismiss either. So I think that's really powerful. What we've seen throughout the bridging movement be really effective, especially in like group settings, is setting conversation agreements. And so for each couple, there might be, and this doesn't have to be just like marriages, any type of relationship, letting people know what your triggers are up front can be quite helpful so that nobody steps in a landmine accidentally. Even if you've been married for 30 years, doesn't hurt to set the reminder.
Right.
And so things like that, and then just basic ground rules, like we're not going to yell. If things get heated, we're going to agree to take 5 minutes and then come back together. Whatever is needed for that couple, I think is important to just put on the table. And the final thing that I'll say, which I've learned a lot through different partners in the Listen First Coalition, modeling different types of programming, is movement often helps. When we sit sedentary, we feel stuck. Our thoughts get stuck. Our emotions get stuck. We feel almost like confined to the environment and the emotions that are there. So if that comes up, I highly recommend taking a walk.
Yeah.
Take a walk and talk while you walk. The movement, there's actually like proven science that your neurons and the synergy of your bodies start to also help create space for synergy of thought and conversation. And even if it just does something to move you in the direction of being able to be more open, if the next time you're stuck in the car and having the conversation, you might be able to draw on some of the benefits of having taken a walk before.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are great times to think about the storytelling element of what happens in relationships, including around politics. And from where I sit, in the types of work that I often do, it deals with historic memory dialogue and getting those stories about things that you may not have even asked, like, how did you celebrate the 4th of July when you were young? Who were your civic role models? What was your sense of patriotism? How did you form an identity as being somewhat of a patriotic American or not, or whatever? But what are those stories? How did your family members role model or not role model, whatever it might be, these kinds of values, or did you come about them through another means? What's that story? And I think if we lean into storytelling, it invites a different style of conversation than if we're focused purely on whether you agree with this policy or that policy. And it's not that we shouldn't talk about those things, but I think a lot of groundwork that's just gets into the who you are as a human and looking at the person, partner, family member, whatever, maybe from a little bit of a different angle, asking different questions and getting that sitting back and listening to their story. I think that's powerful. I also think, recognizing, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, our limitations as individuals. What times a day work for you? Or is this something like we're only going to talk about this on the first Thursday of every month, or is it, I happen to have a relationship right now where we don't talk about politics in the morning and we don't talk about it right before bed. If it's going to come up, we let it sit more towards the middle of the day to the best of our abilities, right? So that's sort of a respect for, when we're maybe at our best together, to have these conversations. And I also would suggest, if you do get into policy, if you do get into those things, and in terms of being willing to use solid critical thinking approaches, things that are not about a judgment and, a kind of those reactionary, but say, all right, we have a disagreement on some facts here. Let's play. Let's go and look online or go to the library, ideally maybe a combination of both, and and see what we can research together, where we fact find together, where we make it a couple's or and father-daughter experiment, whatever it is, where we go through this motion, we say, well, here's where we can find some elements of common ground, and who knows, maybe both of you will walk out of that experiment with a different perspective and a different understanding through that kind of process. So, well, we certainly touched on a lot of different things, and there's a lot of room to go much deeper on all of these topics, which we will hopefully do as time goes on. Just want to thank our audience for being part of this moment here, where we talk about It Takes Two and building more politically resilient relationships. If you're interested in more information about It Takes Two, you can check it out on the Listen First Project website and Waging Dialogue's website, and connect in with us for more opportunities to explore It Takes Two. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.